I installed a camera in my basement to catch my daughter sneaking beers, but what I saw instead destroyed my entire marriage. That footage didn't just expose a secret, it tore my world apart. Hey everyone, my name's Jack Collins and I want to share a story that turned my world upside down. It's wild how you can go through life feeling content, thinking everything is fine, until reality hits you like a freight train. Sometimes, comfort becomes a blindfold, and you don't see what's been happening right under your nose. One day, without any warning, the truth comes crashing down, and you realize your wife hasn't been loyal. But that wasn't even the first red flag. At first, I thought something innocent was going on. I suspected my daughter, Emily, she just turned 18, and a few of her friends were sneaking into our basement to sneak a few sips of the homemade beer I'd brewed. I had poured my heart into that batch, and naturally, I wanted to know who was dipping into it. So, I checked the footage from the security camera I'd installed down there. What I found wasn't kids being mischievous. No, it was far worse. It was my wife, Karen, sitting down there with a man I'd never seen before, laughing, flirting, drinking the very beer I'd crafted. Her secret boyfriend. That moment? It left me gutted, completely blindsided. And just when I thought I was alone in this kind of heartbreak, I remembered my buddy Mike's story. He lives here in Atlanta too, and both of us are part of the same local beer brewing club. Not long ago, at one of our regular meetings, Mike stood up and shared something deeply personal. He told us how he had spent 25 years married to his wife, only to discover she'd been unfaithful for more than 20 of them. 20 years. The betrayal was buried so deep it took him decades to see it. That night, he gave us all a piece of advice I'll never forget. Take off the rose-colored glasses. Look at your marriage with clear eyes. That hit home for me in ways I can't even describe. So here I am sharing my own truth. My name's Jack, and until recently, I believed I'd been happily married to Karen for almost 28 years. We raised 3 wonderful kids together. On the surface, our life looked picture-perfect. Karen, always so graceful and poised, came from a wealthy, well-respected family. Even at 49, she has this youthful glow that makes people think she's barely 35. As for me, I didn't grow up rich, but I was lucky to be raised by loving parents in a small, tight-knit town just outside of Atlanta. I'm the younger of 2 brothers, and our childhood was anything but typical. We grew up right next door to our grandparents who played a huge role in our lives. My dad, following in the family's footsteps, worked faithfully at my grandfather's old hardware store, a place that had become something of a landmark in our town. My brother, Kyle, and I naturally found ourselves part of that world early on. After school and on weekends, we'd pitch in at the store, learning the ropes, stacking shelves, and handling tools we barely understood back then. Kyle, always the ambitious one, went on to study at Georgia Tech, eventually becoming a skilled electrical engineer. He's now doing well for himself at a major paper company over in South Carolina. Watching Kyle chase his dreams gave me the push I needed to carve out my own path. I ended up at Georgia Tech too, but I chose computer science, drawn to coding and the idea of building things in the digital world rather than the physical one. Of all the memories I hold close from my hometown, one of the clearest is of Joey. Every small town has that one kid who seems to have it all. Joey was that guy. What I didn't expect was that he'd become one of the most important people in my life. We met when we were just 3 years old, and from that point on, we were practically glued at the hip. Time passed, but our bond only got stronger. While I headed to Georgia Tech, Joey followed a different path and enrolled at Emory University. He was always a thinker, the kind of guy who loved to explore big ideas. Somehow, despite our different schools and busy lives, we always found time for each other. Whenever he came to my side of the city, I'd play host, and when I visited him at Emory, he returned the favor. On one of those trips to Emory, Joey played matchmaker and set me up on a blind date. That's how I met Karen. I had no clue then how much that meeting would change my life. It was the only blind date that ever made me want a second one. Karen had something about her, an energy, a presence, that stayed with me. During our senior year, we made the most of every minute we had together, even as classes and obligations tried to pull us apart. With each moment we shared, my feelings grew stronger. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to ask her to marry me. I knew we wouldn't be getting any financial help from her side of the family, but it didn't matter. She said yes. Happily even. And I believed we had the beginning of something real, something lasting. Growing up, my parents always emphasized the importance of saving for the future. That lesson stuck with me. From my very first paycheck, I made it a rule to set aside 10%, no matter how little or how much I earned. It was from those carefully saved dollars that I bought Karen's engagement ring. To me, it wasn't just jewelry, it was a promise, a symbol of love, of commitment, of building a life together. The day after I proposed, Karen and I gathered the courage to tell her parents the big news. They were calm, polite, but before their congratulations came, they presented me with something unexpected: a prenuptial agreement. Karen didn't pressure me. She stood by silently as I read through the document, giving me the space to make my own decision. According to the agreement, if our marriage ended within the first 5 years, I'd receive a set amount, though the actual figure was left blank when they handed it to me. Beyond that, the contract made it clear I wouldn't have any claim to additional assets from her or her family. The agreement also had a clause about gradual financial protection. Every 10 years, the amount would increase. If we made it to our 25th anniversary, the cap would grow to $5 million. It was clearly crafted with long-term possibilities in mind. I remember taking it home and showing it to my dad. After reading through it, he nodded thoughtfully and said, "Jack, I know it might feel like a lot to take in, but a marriage can fall apart for all kinds of reasons. This agreement doesn't mean they expect it to fail, it's just a safeguard." He paused and then added something that stuck with me: being together in college is one thing, but sharing a life, navigating real responsibilities, jobs, mortgages, maybe kids, that's a whole different kind of test. Are you absolutely sure you and Karen can weather every storm that might come your way? His words gave me pause, but I believed in us. The prenup also had another clause: if the marriage didn't thrive and ended under normal circumstances, Karen and I would evenly divide whatever we'd built together. Property inherited from either of our families would remain separate. However, if I were the one to cheat, Karen would keep all the assets we acquired during our marriage, and I'd only walk away with what was originally mine. It was a lot to process. But I answered every question my father asked with complete honesty. And when I finished, he looked at me and said, "Yes, son, you've answered well. I trust your judgment." After talking it through with my father, he said he'd arrange for a revised version of the prenup, one that took our discussion into account and felt more balanced. Then he smiled and said, "Come on, let's not keep the ladies waiting." A few weeks later, Karen came over so we could walk through the agreement together. I'll never forget her reaction. She seemed genuinely stunned. It hadn't even crossed her mind that something like this could come up. When she finished reading through it, she looked at me and asked softly, "Jack, you're really okay with this?" I nodded and told her honestly, "Yes, I am." Karen, clearly curious, read through the agreement a second time, this time slower, more carefully. I could see her mind processing all the details. I think it meant something to her, seeing that I wasn't after anything but a fair, honest life with her. Not long after that, our first child came into the world, a beautiful surprise we named Benny after Karen's father. That name carried a lot of weight in her family, and it gave our son's identity a sense of heritage and pride. My dad was over the moon. He'd always dreamed of having a grandchild who might one day take over the family farm and hardware store. My brother Kyle and I had chosen different paths. We stepped away from that life as soon as we had the chance. But seeing Benny gave Dad hope that the legacy might continue through the next generation. And then just like that, time passed. Our unexpected daughter Emma recently turned 18, and let me tell you, she has this uncanny gift of persuasion. She could talk me into anything if she really wanted to. Emma's not just smart, she's magnetic in that way. She's the kind of girl who can change the energy in a room without even trying. Now, about a week ago, something happened that changed everything. I had a strong suspicion that something wasn't quite right, so I asked Frank, a tech-savvy guy I trust, to come by and install a security camera in the basement while Emma was at school. We scheduled it for 11 a.m. the next morning. True to his word, Frank showed up on time. He got the camera set up in just 15 minutes and even stayed an extra 20 to walk me through how to use it properly. We discussed whether or not I should tell Karen about it. I ended up deciding against it. She's not great at keeping secrets, and I worried she might accidentally say something to Emma, or worse, someone else. Later that week, I was reviewing footage from what was supposed to be a typical backyard barbecue. I was hoping to ease my mind. Instead, what I saw left me feeling hollow. There she was, Karen, acting far too familiar with a man I didn't recognize. My heart dropped. I was stunned, angry, and I immediately regretted not installing an audio recorder along with the camera. I wanted to know what was being said, but I only had half the truth. That initial punch of betrayal soon gave way to a deeper, seething rage. But then I remembered something my father always told me: you can't make good decisions in a storm of emotions. Keep a cool head. Never let your anger make choices for you. First, gather all the facts. So that's what I began to do. I remember saying, "See you at 4, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen hadn't come home yet, which gave me a little breathing room. I needed that time, to calm down, to clear my head, to think before emotions got the better of me. An hour later, Emma came downstairs and let me know Karen was back. We went up together and chatted for a bit about her upcoming football game. I reassured her I'd be there, cheering her on from the sidelines like always. Even with so much chaos inside me, I wanted to keep life as normal as possible for our kids. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of all this. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop racing, and I felt like I needed to see things more clearly before deciding my next step. I started reviewing an old audio recording from the previous week, hoping it might fill in some of the blanks. I'd already told Frank I'd be traveling soon, just a 4-day business trip, 3 weeks out, but the real reason was to give us time to gather as much information as possible without raising suspicion. When we caught up again, Frank asked, "Did you bring the tape?" I nodded. "Yeah, I've got everything you asked for." He then wanted to know when he could come by to install an upgraded system. I told him, "Karen plays bridge on Thursday mornings, that's your window." He nodded and asked how much time he'd have to work. I gave him the layout and mentioned I needed his advice on something a little more sensitive. We agreed to meet privately that evening at 6:30. That's how I ended up pulling into Ben's office, Karen's father, with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. He greeted me with a confused look. I'd never asked for a meeting with him like this before. Something in his eyes said he already sensed it was serious. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Sir, for 29 years I've thought of you as more than just my father-in-law. You've been like a second father to me and I'll always be grateful for that." Later that day, once everyone involved had been brought up to speed and gathered on the porch, I told them what they needed to know. I explained as calmly as I could that Karen and the man she'd been seeing were upstairs, in the master bedroom no less. Frank, who had discreetly set up an audio feed, got a signal through his earpiece at that moment, confirming what none of us wanted to hear. I let out a deep sigh, then walked to the front door, unlocked it and guided everyone into the living room. Turning to Ben, I met his eyes and said, gently but firmly, "I'm sure you don't want to walk in on your daughter in such a compromising position," I told Ben softly. "Why don't you wait down here for now?" He nodded, clearly shaken, and I could see the pain in his eyes. No father should ever have to witness something like that. Once he was calm enough, I reaffirmed something that had been weighing on me for years, something I suspected he already knew deep down. "You know, she married me because it was what you and her mother wanted, not because she truly chose me." I looked around the room, feeling the weight of the silence that had settled between us. Everyone standing there, Frank, Ben, a few close family friends, knew what I was getting at. "We all know the truth. Karen married me because you disapproved of her being with Jerome. She didn't walk down that aisle for love. She did it to fulfill your wish for grandkids, to give your family an heir. And she did. We had children. We built a life that looked perfect on paper. But now the truth behind it all was too heavy to ignore." When I later confronted Jerome about his involvement with married women, he didn't even try to hide it. In fact, he practically bragged. "Yeah, I can't help it," he said with a cocky smirk. "There's nothing more exciting than hooking up with a married woman in her husband's bed." His words made my blood run cold. And when someone asked him about his recent escapades since returning to Atlanta, he chuckled and added, "There are 3 married women I'm seeing right now. One of them, funny enough, is Karen Thompson, from our college days. Remember her?" The confirmation hit like a punch to the chest. There was no more doubt, no more what-ifs. Just facts. When we confronted Karen and her brothers with the full truth, their reactions were anything but calm. The weight of the shame and betrayal landed hard on them, especially when I shared Jerome's words. I told Jerome to get dressed, reminding him that his ride should already be outside. But before he left, I made sure he understood one thing clearly: you should know I've shared copies of the evidence, photos, audio, everything, with the husbands of the other women you've been seeing. And I've also sent a copy to your employer. It was time to put an end to this. At that point, things had to move quickly. I turned to him and said, "You need to go. They're waiting for you downstairs." Steve, a friend who'd been helping me keep things under control, stepped in, took Jerome by the arm and led him out. I watched them go, feeling both shattered and strangely relieved. Then I turned to Karen, the woman I had once trusted with my heart, my life. My wife. Or at least, the person who had worn that title. I looked her square in the eyes and asked, "Tell me, Karen, what does it feel like? To know that the one person you once said you loved has been made a fool of by you? What goes through your mind when you realize you were never really in love with me, that I was just some placeholder, someone to keep your parents happy?" Her face was pale, her eyes downcast. She didn't say a word. And as I watched her, I felt something inside me shift. I saw her for who she really was, Not the woman I thought I married, but someone who had buried her truth under years of lies. "I'm done," I said quietly but firmly. "You're not worth another second of my time." Then I told her, "Get dressed. Your father is downstairs waiting to take you home." Ben had reluctantly agreed to take her in, for now. He made it clear he wasn't ready to tell Alice, his wife, about everything just yet. And honestly, I didn't care anymore. I looked Karen in the eye and added, "You have 5 minutes. Put on the exact clothes you were wearing when you welcomed your lover into our home tonight. That's the only way you leave this house." When she reached for her wedding and engagement rings, I stopped her. She removed them slowly, almost ceremoniously, and I said, "You don't deserve to wear those." She reached for her purse and I stopped her again. "No. You leave with nothing but the clothes you wore tonight. That's all." Ben walked up to me then. He took my hand, shook it solemnly, and quietly thanked me for letting her change before she left. "I'll take care of everything from here," he said, his voice strained but steady. What came next was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, breaking the news to our children. Telling them that their mother had betrayed the foundation of our family was devastating. I watched their faces twist in confusion, sadness, and disbelief. That pain, that look in their eyes, is something I'll never forget. As a small act of peace, I allowed Ben and Alice to come by and collect Karen's personal belongings. I gave them full access to sort through and take what was hers. I just wanted to be done with it all. Then, 2 months later, something unexpected happened. Ben called me and asked to meet, formally in his office. Caught me off guard. We'd spoken plenty by phone over the years, but this felt different. You see, for the past 25 years, Ben had constantly encouraged me to join his family business. I always turned him down. I wanted to build something of my own, to avoid the whispers that I was riding his coattails or chasing a fortune that wasn't mine. But now, things had changed. We began meeting regularly, once a month, with Ben and his business partner, Dan. And what started as a strained relationship slowly began to shift into something cooperative, maybe even healing. Our children, especially Benny and Emma, had started asking about the family business too. I made sure they were kept informed, especially Ben, who now relied on Dan for regular updates and guidance. Dan has become a sort of mentor to Benny. There's a structure now, a system in place, something solid for Benny to lean on should he ever step into a larger role one day. These days, I lean heavily on the support of my father and brother. Their presence keeps me grounded. Even though Karen has moved in with her parents down in Florida, she still keeps regular contact with the kids. Dean and Benny visit her pretty often, and Emma spends time with her too when she can. I've never tried to get in the way of that. As complicated as things are between Karen and me, I know the kids deserve both parents in their lives. In the end, karma found its way back to Karen in ways I won't spell out here. Life has a way of making things right in time. Now, shifting gears, I want to tell you about another chapter of my life. A different story of heartbreak and revelation. Hi again. I'm Jack. And before everything happened with Karen, I went through something similar, though it felt very different, with a woman named Maya. She was my girlfriend back then and I was certain we were in love. Or at least I thought we were. But she broke my trust. She cheated. And when the truth came out, it shattered me. I never saw it coming. After we broke up, I threw myself into work. I'd landed a solid position at a growing tech company, fast-paced, challenging but fulfilling. Then, as if life was offering a second chance, I met someone. Her name was, also Maya. Different woman, same name. She had just graduated from college, full of drive and ambition, while I was already climbing my own professional ladder. The first time I saw her, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just her beauty, it was her energy, her wit, her curiosity about the world. I've always been drawn to people who are driven, who know what they want. I struggle to connect with folks who just drift through life with no purpose. Maya wasn't like that. She had her goals lined up and she was out there every day chasing them. Even though I didn't go on dates all that often, she gave me a chance. I tried to be a gentleman, always treating her with respect, never pushing too hard. I made her a promise early on, that she would always feel safe with me, physically and emotionally. I've never had a temper. I've never raised my hand to anyone, let alone a woman. Loyalty is something I take seriously, and I made it clear I wasn't going to betray her trust. My job at the time gave me some flexibility, about 60% remote, 40% in the office. That balance gave us the chance to spend quality time together. And while Maya had the opportunity to move abroad for work at one point, she chose not to. I never said anything, but deep down I noticed that she appreciated how I supported her financially, especially during those early months. Our friend Andrea would sometimes joke, teasing Maya and calling her a little spoiled. Maya always pushed back on that, proudly pointing to how hard she'd worked in college and the part-time jobs she held as a teen. And it's true, she had put in a lot of effort to get where she was. I admired that about her. I always believed Maya deserved rest, support, and comfort, especially after everything she'd worked through. I never once doubted that. So when she told me she wanted to plan a big, elegant wedding, I did my best to understand where she was coming from, even though I had some reservations. I wasn't convinced that spending a fortune on a single day made much sense. But I respected her dream and she knew that. She wanted her best friend, Andrea, to be her maid of honor. I thought that was a no-brainer. Maya loved and trusted her deeply. But when we broke the news to Andrea, her reaction caught me off guard. She didn't smile. She didn't say congratulations. She just stared at us and said flatly, "Are you serious?" That moment hung in the air. Andrea let out a long, frustrated sigh, dropped her purse to the floor, and yanked Maya's engagement ring from her finger, not her own but Maya's, as if trying to make a point. Then she forced a smile, looked at me and said, "Well, okay." I'd spent enough time around Andrea to read her expressions, and I could tell this wasn't joy. It wasn't excitement. It was a mask. Even though I kept my doubts to myself, that moment planted something inside me. A kind of quiet suspicion. Something was off. Still, I didn't want to believe that Andrea, of all people, would let her own issues taint Maya's big day. To her credit, Maya stepped up in a big way. She found a job just a few months before the wedding. She knew I wasn't in a position to afford the designer gown she wanted or to pay for all the bridesmaid dresses. Without hesitation, she offered to cover most of the costs herself. It was a practical and generous decision, and I appreciated it more than she probably realized. In the middle of all the planning, I tried not to let my uneasiness about Andrea affect anything. Maya cherished her friendship with her. I didn't want to throw shadows on that bond. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling that Andrea wasn't just uncomfortable, she was actively trying to derail things. Her smiles never reached her eyes. Her comments were laced with something sharp and unspoken. Worse, it started to feel like she was either trying to manipulate me, or worse, tempt me. Subtle touches, odd compliments, lingering glances. I kept my distance always, but it made me deeply uncomfortable. Then, during Maya's bachelorette party, the truth finally came crashing in. It was late. I had been helping clean up after an earlier get-together when I walked into the wrong part of the house. And what I saw confirmed every suspicion I'd tried to bury. Andrea wasn't just being distant. She had crossed a line. The friend who was with me was just as stunned as I was. He tried to talk me down, tried to offer some words to make sense of what we were seeing, but I wasn't ready to be consoled. I waved him off and kept walking. My heart felt like it was carrying 1,000 pounds as I walked down that hallway. Maya's laughter still echoed somewhere behind me, carefree, innocent, unaware. And I was left alone with the truth I could no longer ignore. I could hear Maya's voice echoing down the hall, loud, desperate, broken. She was yelling at Andrea, demanding answers, trying to make sense of the betrayal. "What? Why would you do this to me?" she shouted, her voice raw and trembling. The room was filled with tension, until Andrea responded with a calmness that cut through the chaos like ice. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look guilty. All she said was, "He deserves someone better." That sentence hit harder than any scream. Even my parents, who had spent months helping us plan the wedding, were completely taken aback by my sudden decision to call everything off. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. We'd poured time, energy, and money into every detail. But I was too crushed, too emotionally exhausted to offer them a proper explanation. I locked myself in my room, needing distance from everyone and everything. The silence there was the only thing that didn't hurt. Outside my door, I could hear voices, my parents, our mutual friends, asking what had happened. Some were confused. Others sounded angry. But none of them knew the whole story. Meanwhile, Maya didn't respond to any of it. She pretended to faint, right there in front of everyone. It was a performance, an escape, and I couldn't help but feel disgusted by it. Some people mistook my silence for weakness or indecision. But in reality, I had already made up my mind. I didn't want to salvage anything. Not the relationship. Not the wedding. Not the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. Then came the final blow. Maya confessed, almost casually, that during our relationship she had been seeing her ex-boyfriend behind my back. She said it started because I was busy with work, that I wasn't around enough. As if that made it okay. Her words cut deep. After everything I had given, my time, my care, my respect, that's what I got in return. She tried to spin it as if her loneliness justified her cheating. That somehow it was understandable. But it wasn't. And I couldn't accept that narrative. Looking back, there were signs I ignored. Like how obsessed she was with going to the gym. She claimed she was committed to her health, and at the time I believed her. It never occurred to me that those daily gym sessions weren't just about working out. Only recently did I learn the truth about what was really happening during those hours. As it turned out, Maya hadn't just been reconnecting with her college boyfriend, she'd been secretly seeing him the whole time. More often than not, when she claimed to be spending time with Andrea, she was actually with him. I later learned that she'd even asked Andrea to lie for her to cover her tracks. That revelation changed everything. Suddenly, Andrea's strange reaction to our engagement made perfect sense. It wasn't just jealousy or disapproval, it was shock. She had known the truth the whole time, and watching Maya pretend she was ready to marry me must have been a performance too surreal even for her. Accepting it was hard. But it was also freeing. I realized Maya had been using me, emotionally, financially, even socially. I'm not blind to my flaws. I know I'm not the most attractive man in the room. But what I've always wanted was simple. A marriage built on mutual love, respect, and acceptance. I never wanted to be in a relationship where my partner saw herself as somehow doing me a favor, or worse, where I was seen as undeserving of love. I've seen where those kinds of relationships end up, and I promised myself I'd never be part of one. The final conversation between us was short and explosive. Maya, in a fit of rage, ripped off her engagement ring and hurled it at me before storming out of the house. I stood there, staring at the ring lying on the floor, not sure whether to feel relief or grief. Not long after that, I found out the full story. Her boyfriend had left her, walked out as soon as he realized she could no longer financially support him. And when she told him she was pregnant, he didn't stick around. Apparently, the deception had run its course. Desperate, she turned her attention back to me. She started calling from different numbers, trying to manipulate her way back into my life. But I blocked every one of them, refusing to give her another opening. And just when I thought it was over, when I believed the chapter had finally closed, she showed up. Unannounced. Uninvited. And unfortunately, at that very moment,